Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, Season 2, Episode 1, Episode 2, and Episode 3 video. They released the first 3 episodes in one go, so I'll just do one big video for all of them. There's so much to talk about, so if you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the episodes. Careful for spoilers for the first 3 episodes if you have not seen them yet. Starting at the beginning of Episode 1, it was titled Elven Kings Under the Sky, which is a reference to the black speech Sauron inscribed on the Ring of Power, the whole poem. 3 rings for the Elven Kings under the sky, 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. It's meant to set off Season 2 because it's all about Sauron actually creating the 1 ring of power and forging the other lesser rings of power. Putting a whole lot of rings on a whole lot of fingers this season. The actual opening scene of the season basically tells all of Sauron's backstory starting at the end of the First Age and the beginning of the Second Age, like what happened to him before he became Halbrand. We get a much longer version of the flashback that we got at the beginning of Season 1, Episode 1 to explain what happened to Sauron before the events of the series pick up. The orcs bring his crown out as he's trying to tell them about his plan to conquer Middle-earth now that he has become the new Dark Lord after Morgoth was defeated. And probably one of the biggest reveals here is what Sauron looked like before he was killed for the first time, or before his body was destroyed for the first time. This actor is Jack Lowden. Charlie Vickers plays Sauron's other forms later during the Second Age after Adar killed him and he has to reform his body again. And if you haven't seen it, there was a deleted scene from The Return of the King that shows Sauron in his original angelic Valar form. This is actually what he looks like in his true original form. Anytime the Valar descend to the world, they have to take a physical form like this, like Gandalf, for instance, takes a physical form, so he has a different natural form that he existed in when he was in the Timeless Halls. But this is essentially meant to be Sauron when he's still at 100% full power. Each time his body is destroyed and his essence has to reform itself, he gets weakened. Eventually, his body is destroyed multiple times. In the last time, during the Return of the King, he was left in such a weakened state that he didn't even have enough power to reform his body. So essentially, he's just floating around as particles around the universe to the end of days. It's a good reminder, and he mentions this to a couple different people in the episodes, that he cannot be killed. Like, you cannot kill an immortal being. You can only trap them and destroy their body. It's the same thing that happened to Morgoth after he was defeated by the other Valar. Like, his essence is sitting beyond the Door of Night in the realm that they all came from before Eru, the god in the Lord of the Rings universe, created the universe itself. It's sort of like the black nothingness of chaos, like he's just stewing out there, but there is a prophecy called the Dagor or Dagorath that says someday he'll find a way to return to the universe and there'll be a final battle in an end of days kind of situation. Notice the robes that he's wearing when he's giving them his big pitch speech here about how they're going to take over the rest of the world. It has this ring-like inscription in black speech around it, sort of foreshadowing for the 1 ring of power. There are many references to the 1 ring of power during all the episodes, as well as the other rings of power. When he says after a defeat, the shadow takes another shape and grows again, it's both a reference to Morgoth, Melkor, his master, and to Sauron himself, because throughout the Lord of the Rings history, Sauron is defeated multiple times, and each time he takes another form and has to regrow his power. One of his special abilities that he used all the time during the First Age, the Second Age, was to actually change his form like a shapeshifter, but because of the way his power works, he can appear to people in the form that they find most pleasing. Which we see him do later when he's trying to trick Celebrimbor into forging the rest of the Rings of Power. They confirmed the tower that we saw at the beginning of Season 1, Episode 1, where Sauron rallied Morgoth's remaining forces, is Forodwaith in the far north. It says the dawn of the Second Age because they demarcate the passing of the First Age to the Second Age with Morgoth's actual defeat. Like, it became the Second Age the minute he was defeated. Just like the Third Age begins right after Sauron's body is destroyed for the second time, we saw that battle at the very beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring. They're probably going to wind up ending the Rings of Power series on that actual battle. During his speech, he quotes the line, "Power not of the flesh, but over flesh," which he's repeated multiple times, other characters too, during Season 1 and during Season 2. And you notice that Adar has been recast. Season 1, it was Joseph Mawley, who most people remember from Game of Thrones as Benjen Stark. I'm not sure why he left the show, maybe a scheduling conflict. We'll see how this actor does. But notice how Adar is not happy about Sauron's plan to use the power of the unseen world to enslave the regular world, because it also means enslaving all of his orc brethren and children, essentially. Also does not help that Sauron tells them that he's going to kill most of the orcs here that are standing here in his experiments. Like, we will conquer the world, we will make it better for our kind. Oh, and also, by the way, most of you are going to die. This is all about his plan to tap into the power of the unseen world, but he hasn't come up with his idea to create the Rings of Power yet. That doesn't come till much later. For now, this is sort of like his plan, Phase 1. Phase 2, Phase 3, Phase 4, like that gets into the actual forging the Rings of Power. The Valar and some of the more powerful lesser beings exist in both the seen and unseen world. They have forms in both worlds. In the unseen world, Sauron, the other Valar, for example, appear in their full original angelic form. We get a look at the unseen world when Frodo puts the One Ring on, because the power of the ring basically pulls its wearer into the unseen world. It's sort of like this magical realm. So anyone wearing the ring actually gets pulled in here. Also, Galadriel talks about getting visions of the unseen world, seeing things from the future when she's wearing her Ring of Power. It's basically like a realm of pure power, which is why Sauron is trying to tap into it and use it to conquer the regular seen world. When he's talking about his speech, he talks about ruling everyone, bringing them together as one. It's more references to the One Ring of Power, binding everyone with the One Ring of Power, but he hasn't fully conceived of the idea of the actual One Ring yet. He then kills his first attempted assassin. Notice how bored he looks while stabbing him repeatedly, like he could not care less about any of these orcs. You start to notice, too, as he gets madder and madder, his face starts to change form just a little bit, like you see his power basically changing his form. Then as Adar recites his oath to Sauron in the Black Speech, naming him the new Dark Lord after Morgoth, who was the first Dark Lord, kills him with his crown, R.I.P. Sauron, for the first time, even though technically he didn't die, so we shouldn't say R.I.P. But notice a couple of details when they're actually laying into him. Like, notice how many orcs it takes to slow him down. Like, they stab him a whole bunch of times and it barely phases him. This is how powerful he is. Like, it takes all of them, like a whole bunch of them, stabbing him repeatedly. Notice the camera zooms in on his face. You can hear him whispering an incantation in the Black Speech, probably sensing that his body is about to be destroyed, like his life force is flowing out. So he's probably performing some kind of magic that will help him return in another form. This might just be part of what he does each time this happens in the future. I am not fluent in Black Speech. The subtitles also didn't translate what he was actually whispering there. So if you do speak it and you can translate, let me know what he actually said in the comments below. Then we see his body detonate in this explosion of his power. Like, this is how powerful he is. It essentially just wastes all the area surrounding in this mountain range here. This is basically what it looks like anytime his physical form is destroyed. And it's also why, when they inspect the blast site, there is no body, like they just find his clothes, because his essence dispersed, also turned into the black goo that we see later. Then they name Adar their new orc lord, like their father lord, because technically he is biologically related to all these different orcs here. We'll get into that too. I talked about that during Season 1. He gets into his backstory later in the episodes when he starts talking about what Morgoth did, blessing him, quote-unquote, changing the elves into orcs that he came from. But notice he picks up Sauron's crown. That'll become important later because we see Sauron fighting Galadriel using his crown. So at some point, he will get his crown back. Then we see a much longer montage to explain what happened to Sauron exactly step for step after this and how he took his Halbrand form. And if it wasn't clear, they're condensing the timeline a lot, like it took a long time for his body to transform into different forms. So like he was sitting there in a pool of goo form for a very long time before that giant creature came along, he consumed it, and then grew a little bit larger, gained more power, and was able to crawl out of the caves. We finally see him crawl into the path of a random cart until he's able to consume this woman, R.I.P. to her, and take his Halbrand form. Then it seems like based on the way they explain this, his next plan is to just go find Adar and revenge kill him until he winds up running into that person who served the former kings of the Southlands. When he says the first ones to die were probably the fortunate ones, it's because of his master plan to rule everyone, enslave everyone, so anyone that survives would suffer a far worse fate. Then he spots that mark of the former line of kings in the Southlands, the crest that he uses later to trick Galadriel into thinking that he's the lost king of the Southlands, the king of men, is basically that person that he said that he killed taking it. He also reveals that he is not the last in the line of the kings of men, he was just the servant of those kings, meaning that the true king might be out there somewhere. There were a lot of theories during Season 1 that Theo might secretly be like the last in that line of kings. We'll see about that, it just feels like they have big plans for Theo, some big reveal in a future season. And it's basically this man's speech that gives Sauron the pep talk that he needs to double down on his plan to conquer the world and find, quote-unquote, a better way. Work smarter, not harder. So he winds up throwing in with them, following them, trying to find some alternate, better way to accomplish his long-term goal to conquer the world. This seems like it's the beginnings of his ideas to create the Rings of Power. When he mentions some place across the sea a man can escape himself, he's also probably referring to Valinor, the Undying Lands. There are a lot of references to Valinor during the episodes. Then we basically find out how he wound up on that life raft when he met Galadriel for the first time. It wasn't totally clear if he caused the sea creature to attack the ship and destroy it, or if the sea creature was already doing that. But he winds up ripping the king's sigil off the dying man, and notice it seems like he's communicating with the sea creature underwater here, like the creature is afraid of him because it senses his power. Then we see the rest of the events of Season 1 when Galadriel washes up to that raft. Now, he didn't know that she was coming. This is just meant to be a coincidence that he sees then as an opportunity that he can take advantage of. In a big part of his pitch to Galadriel during Season 1, I don't know if he's still on this. It seems like he's slowly backing off this, and now he's more about world domination. But during Season 1, it was the whole idea that he was trying to save the world from Morgoth, who he thought was going to do far worse things to the world. It's sort of that villain trope where the villain is trying to save things, but ultimately winds up crushing everyone in trying to save them. They're actually kind of taking Robert Downey Jr.'s Doctor Doom character in that direction when he comes back during Avengers 5. Basically the same idea. I'm going to make everything better by crushing everyone with my idea of freedom. Then we jump back to present day with Galadriel chasing Elrond, trying to snatch the bag of the 3 Elven Rings of Power from him because Elrond is worried about the big reveal after finding out about Sauron. I think the way they're explaining here is that this is happening like right after the events of Season 1, so she hasn't had time to tell everybody about Sauron yet, but they do kind of mention that during the episode, like, why didn't you tell us sooner that Sauron was amongst us this whole time? Would have been very useful information. Thus begins the big disagreement that everybody has about what they should do with the actual Rings of Power. Like, should we destroy them? Should we wear them? Should we use them? There's a bit of a funny moment here too, because Gil-galad kind of drops the Elven language version of an F-bomb. I didn't know the Elves had their own version of an F-bomb. When she says that Sauron never touched the 3 Elven rings, that's actually accurate to the book's lore. The other Rings of Power he did have a hand in making, which we actually see during Episode 3, like he actually touches and puts some of his power into the making of those rings. That's so that when he wore the 1 Ring of Power, he could control anyone else that was wearing the rings themselves. They've already shown that he has this low-level ability to worm his way into people's minds and control what they're thinking, what they're saying, what they're believing. But with the 1 Ring of Power, he can actually do that in a much, much bigger way. There are a couple big book changes that they made for the way the actual Elven rings were created. So in the books, originally the Elven rings were the last ones that Celebrimbor created, and he created those separately without Sauron knowing about them so that he couldn't lay his influence, his magic on them. And in the books, the elves were too afraid to actually use the rings because they felt like they would fall under Sauron's sway if they put them on. So it was a very, very long time before any of the elves actually used any of their Rings of Power. On the show, they started out with them creating the Elven rings and then started to create the other rings for the other races. Then Elrond jumps over the falls to avoid having to turn the rings over to Gil-galad, who wants to use them to basically heal the blight on their land, like this black blight that's on the tree and throughout the rest of their lands, and basically stop the fading of elves' life forces. What's happening to all the elves in Middle-earth is that essentially like the light of Valinor, like the light of the Valar is fading in them, their life force is fading, so they have to go back to Valinor in the Undying Lands. The Rings of Power can basically stop that from happening. Then we see how Sauron makes it back in front of Adar, he lets himself be captured, and this is all part of his master plan to get everybody else to do his dirty work for him. Basically, get the orcs to attack the elves in hope that they destroy each other, and he can just walk in and claim the Rings of Power for himself. That's one of Sauron's big tricks that he uses across all the different ages that he's around during the lore, is basically getting other people to do his dirty work for him. Notice we see Waldreg from Season 1. He's gotten a big promotion, serving as Adar's underboss, working all the slaves. Notice that Adar has Sauron's sword that he forged. It has its own special powers that we saw during Season 1 when it tastes blood, but also it was created to be a key activating the dam that would cause Mount Doom to transform the Southlands into Mordor. And you notice that Waldreg calls the orcs the Uruks. That was their original name of the orcs when Morgoth first transformed the Avari elves that he captured, the 13 that were chosen that Adar says that he was part of. This was a big event early in the Lord of the Rings history where Morgoth basically found a group of elves before the rest of the Valar found them. He performed crazy experiments on them, turning them into what became the orcs. So the idea is that all the orcs that you see here are descended from those original 13, which Adar was one of. So all these orcs are literally biologically related to Adar, just very distantly. That's why they all call him Father. Then we learn more about Sauron's short-term plan to get the orcs to attack the elves. He makes them think that Galadriel has allied with Sauron, who has returned. Remember that Adar cannot detect that Halbrand is Sauron, like he can't sense his power. Basically telling him that the weapon that Sauron was originally trying to create when Adar killed him is now being created by the elves. So that's where all the big battle scenes come from that we saw in the earlier trailers. Then we see the stranger traveling to Rhûn with Nori. So big deal, like big place in the lore that we didn't really spend that much time in during the original movies. There are a lot of Runish soldiers, like we saw a lot of the elephants, but that's about it. Like we saw them in Sauron's army inside the rest of Middle-earth. We didn't actually travel to the east. There are a lot of theories that he's going to wind up being one of the Blue Wizards because later in the episodes, they do name him as one of the Istari, like he is one of the wizards. The question is, which wizard is he? Based on the rights that I think that the Rings of Power people at Amazon have access to, I think that they can't do Gandalf, so I think the Blue Wizard's probably the best guess after that. Then he sees a whole bunch of visions and hears some voices. It sounds like he hears someone speaking Elvish or the Black speech, like some sort of incantation. He sees the molten lava of Mount Doom, what eventually kind of looks like the Eye of Sauron, like it forms in the lava here. This is him casting that wind magic that we see in later episodes, like the big tornado that he makes. And this person is the Dark Wizard, played by Ciarán Hinds, who is also on Game of Thrones. Like, there's a lot of Game of Thrones actors that are showing up on Rings of Power. It seems like he's ruling in the East, and he refers to himself like he's also an immortal being, so he might be one of the Istari as well, too. He could be one of the other Blue Wizards. Then he sees a bunch of the female acolytes which he faced during Season 1, which we find out are also servants of the Dark Wizard character. Nori says he's been having these visions for a while now, every night, so it just seems like he's slowly remembering who he is, where he came from, and why he is on Middle-earth, like what his purpose is. This person watching them from afar with the spyglass is a Runish soldier that we learn a little bit more about in later episodes. Generally, they're all meant to be servants of the Dark Wizard. There are a couple moments in this episode and then in later episodes where they tease the idea that he hasn't fully learned to control his power yet. This is part of the idea, like Gandalf, for instance, Saruman, the other wizards are all very, very powerful. He refers to himself as a wizard, and a lot of what he says to Nori here, like the playful attitude that he takes with her, sounds a lot like Gandalf's attitude when he's talking to Frodo, joking about being a wizard. He talks about missing his home but not remembering where he came from. He's probably talking about the Timeless Halls where Eru, their god creator, lives, and the other Valar who chose not to descend to the world. Then back in Mordor, notice the beast starts to sense Sauron's power and begins to submit to him. He sort of turns it to his will eventually, which they reference in a bunch of other scenes with different characters too. The idea that Sauron worms his way into your mind and learns to control you. There are a couple of funny foreshadowing moments with Waldreg here, like he just goes all ham on Sauron. Like, remember, during Season 1, he kept referring to the Dark Lord returning, like he worships Sauron as his Dark Lord, and here he is, and he spends all day beating him. So bad call on Waldreg for insulting the person that he's been worshipping all this time, who also then tells him that the minute he gets out of here, he's going to kill him, which he then pay off the joke later in the episodes. Then we go to the Great Havens and we meet Cirdan the Shipwright for the first time on the show, who's a really, really big character from the books. He's meant to be the oldest elf living in Middle-earth, one of the wisest and most noble ones, all the way from the First Age to, like, he's a very big figure in Elven history. He's basically the one who takes everyone to Valinor that is allowed to go, because remember, there's the band of the Valar. So like at the end of Return of the King, he's the one who captained the ship that took Gandalf, Frodo, Bilbo, Galadriel, everyone to Valinor. And for most of the timeline of the books, after he comes to Middle-earth, he's the ruler of this Grey Havens area. When he says perfection exists only in Valinor, that's probably because the immortal elves have perfected their craft over millennia. It's also probably a reference to Feanor, the greatest craftsman in the history of the world, basically. He's the one that created the Silmarils, the Palantir Seeing Stones, both which get referenced many times during the show. Celebrimbor, for example, is his grandson, which is one of the reasons why he's so obsessed with creating something as great as Feanor created. He also has Feanor's hammer, which he's been using to craft the Rings of Power. When he looks across the sea at the sunset, he's basically looking to Valinor. When Gil-galad chides Galadriel saying that he wants to cast her to the Ettenmoors, that's an area north of Rivendell that became infested with trolls and all manner of bad creatures. Like, it's a really terrible place. When she says she vows to put things right and not stop until Sauron is defeated, we know that's going to take thousands of years because she doesn't leave Middle-earth and go back to Valinor till after Return of the King. That's why she goes back to Valinor, because her quote-unquote job is done, like Sauron has been defeated. Cirdan then makes a whole bunch of references back to the One Ring of Power which Sauron will eventually create when he says they have so much power they can change the heart of any who beheld them. The joke is the Rings of Power cause people to fear those who wear them, so they change their hearts, but for worse, like in a bad way. When he says Celebrimbor succeeded in turning elf against elf, that's also him referencing Feanor in the Silmarils, the Oath of Feanor, the first kinslaying, which is exactly what it sounds like. The Oath of Feanor caused the sons of Feanor to kill a ton of their own kind. It was a really, really big deal in the history of the elves. There was like a brief flashback scene at the beginning of Season 1, Episode 1, where we actually saw the Oath of Feanor going down. Then Elrond sort of wises up and starts to suspect Sauron's larger plan to use the rings to enslave everyone. Cirdan then mentions Elrond's father, Eärendil, whose statue is in the bay at Numenor we saw throughout Season 1. He's the one who convinced the Valar to join the war against Morgoth during the War of Wrath in the First Age. Instead of dying like a normal human being, his fate was to eternally traverse the great ocean with the Silmaril that Beren and Luthien had wrested from Morgoth and guard the sun and the moon. So over all these thousands of years, while Elrond is running around trying to save the world from Sauron, his father is essentially just riding across the sky. Cirdan then starts talking about one of the major battles from the War of Wrath against Morgoth, and he describes the sinking of the continent Beleriand when he starts talking about an idea for how to get rid of the Elven Rings of Power. There was a brief flashback to the sinking of Beleriand during Season 1, like when we basically saw the First Age big battles. He mentions Manwë, the greatest of the Valar, after Morgoth. Remember, Manwë, not the most powerful Valar, that was actually Morgoth. And the funny thing is that anytime that Galadriel talks about her friendship with Elrond, you have to remember that Galadriel is basically Elrond's mother-in-law. If he hasn't done it already, Elrond will eventually marry Galadriel's daughter. When Elrond questions whether or not Galadriel is still under Sauron's influence, he's not totally wrong. Part of the idea is that once he worms his way into your mind, he is there forever. You kind of see that in a bigger way with Celebrimbor's story, where like Sauron definitely has him on his hook. Then we see Cirdan about to cast the rings to the ruins of Beleriand in this deep chasm, but there's this weird attack on his ship, like this big splash, like a creature attacks his ship, causing him to look at the rings and take them out, falling under their sway. Part of the problem with a scene like this is that you know that he wasn't going to throw those rings away because we know that they're wearing the rings during the events of the movies much later in the timeline. Back in the east, the stranger and Nori find out it's Poppy from Season 1 has been the one that's been tailing him this whole time, but she's brought a map of the area with her that helps them escape the area where they've basically been trapped, running in circles. There's another cool transition using the map. Love the way they use these transitions, confirming that they are in Rhûn. Back in Mordor, Adar basically dumps his entire backstory on Sauron, not knowing that it's actually Sauron because Sauron's a big part of his backstory, explaining how Morgoth chose 13 of his elves to transform them and give them great power, but ultimately led to nothing, like led to the ruin of them. He says he was chained and left on the top of a mountain forever until Sauron shows up in his original elvish form that we saw at the beginning of the episode, gave him wine, which he took, and makes it sound like that was Sauron bending him to his will, just like we saw him do giving the meat to the beast a little while ago. And the way he's doing the same thing with the elves, the races of Middle-earth with the rings of power, coming as the bearer of gifts, but the price is basically their enslavement, like they're basically signing over their lives to Sauron. So Adar is basically telling the story of how he came to be Sauron's slave for a time until he tried to kill him. You can also see the way that Sauron's face changes while he's telling the story because he was there, like he lived it too. He was the other part of that story. Like, yeah, I remember visiting you on that mountaintop and giving you that wine. And basically winds up tricking Adar into releasing him so that he can enact the next phase of his plan and make it to Celebrimbor to forge the rest of the Rings of Power. But notice how pissed off he is to have to kneel and swear fealty to Adar, but he does try to twist it in his way, like he says he's going to swear fealty to the Lord of the area, but that's basically him, like he is the Dark Lord. So basically Sauron is swearing fealty to himself. And they pay off his threat to Waldreg to kill him, having the beast that he freed rip him to shreds. R.I.P. to Waldreg, you died how you lived like a total crapbag. Gil-galad sings a song about the fading of the elves until Cirdan returns with the Rings of Power. Notice he's wearing his ring Narya, the Ring of Fire. The blue ring falls at Gil-galad's feet, which is the ring he eventually wears. Vilya, the blue ring of air, and Nenya, the white ring of water, falls for Galadriel, which she winds up wearing. Notice when they put all the rings on and start to use them, it actually heals the blight in the area, like it burns it out of the tree. But while this is happening, they start playing that song, Where the Shadows Lie Again, as a reminder that Sauron's plan is still causing all this to happen, like it's all part of his master plan. Just as Sauron returns to Celebrimbor in Halbrand form and starts to enact his plan, but because at the end of Season 1, he has to wait at the gate until Celebrimbor invites him in. Then we get episode 2, which was titled Where the Stars Are Strange, which is a reference to them finally making it to Rhûn in the east, which the movies never really got into that much. There's another cool transition to the map in Mordor with the fires of Mount Doom, confirming that that is what the stranger saw. The blackness spreading through the rest of Middle-earth and up to Khazad-dûm is basically just the influence of Sauron and the spreading of the power through the Rings of Power. There's a big earthquake, and I think the dwarves' theory about what caused it is half right, like 50% correct. Part of it was the eruption of Mount Doom, but also I think it has something to do with what they were doing with the Balrog waking up. There was a lot of Balrog in the Season 2 trailer, so we'll see how they invoke that, because the Balrog doesn't wind up killing all the dwarves, running the rest of them out of Khazad-dûm until much, much later in the timeline. So I do not expect to see the fall of Khazad-dûm during the events of Rings of Power at any point. They might just continue to tease that it will happen eventually in the future, like a long ways off. We get a brand new intro scene. It's meant to show the forging of all the new Rings of Power, like that's what these are. The red mixing in is probably a reference to Sauron's essence that he bakes into the rings themselves, like Sauron's influence over the rings. Generally, I think you're meant to feel Sauron's influence over the intro scene way more because of his role in the story this season. Back in Lindon, Galadriel has a vision while she's planting flowers near her brother's monument. This is all part of her visions of the unseen world and her seeing bits of the future because she's been wearing her Ring of Power. She sees Celebrimbor being killed by Sauron, who also quotes the inscription on the One Ring of Power, the Black Speech. The elves start to battle plan against the orcs in Adar, also thinking that Sauron is going to do the obvious thing and just try and take over their army and then attack them. Generally do not seem like they have any idea what Sauron's real plan is, trying to worm his way in, like secretly backdoor getting Celebrimbor to create the rest of the Rings of Power. When Galadriel talks about getting visions of the future, that's actually something that happens throughout her family line, like it's not just her, and it wasn't necessarily tied to her wearing her Ring of Power. But generally, wearing the Rings of Power, even the lesser rings, pulls people into or causes them to see visions of the unseen world. Gil-galad's warning here about Sauron being able to twist reality for people's minds that he's wormed his way into is meant to be foreshadowing for Celebrimbor's storyline, crafting the rest of those rings. When he says she can't face him alone again, that's probably going to eventually cause her to seek out the help of the other races to unite them against him in what will eventually become the War of the Last Alliance. Like I said, that's probably going to be how they end the series, with the War of the Last Alliance. There are a couple events that conspire to help Sauron accomplish his goal at Eregion with Celebrimbor. We find out the messengers that Gil-galad sent informing him of Sauron's true intentions and his disguise wound up being killed before they could arrive. And you have Sauron trying to twist Celebrimbor against Gil-galad, making him think that he's fallen out of favor with Gil-galad or is being taken advantage of by Gil-galad. Then we get a real deep dive on Ciarán Hinds' new Dark Wizard character. Now, they haven't fully revealed who he's meant to be. He might be one of the other Istari, based on the way he talks about himself. It looks like he uses his magic here to return the acolyte that the stranger had killed during Season 1, who informs him about what Sauron is doing right now. He mentions the Istar specifically. He's talking about the stranger, like this is them confirming that the stranger is one of the wizards. The Istari are the group of angels that Gandalf and the other wizards come from. They're like their own little subgroup of angels. Mumakil that he mentions are the elephant riders that we saw the Runish soldiers using during the movies. It's not really clear what his intentions are for the stranger. He just says they need to find him before he realizes his full power, like before he remembers everything. There's also this subplot with the Runish soldiers where they have some sort of curse that they describe or some sort of disease that's eating their flesh. That might be one of the ways the Dark Wizard is keeping control over them. There are a couple funny moments with Poppy and Nori trying to come up with names for the stranger. If he is one of the Blue Wizards, I don't think that Tolkien ever revealed their actual names in the lore. They just reference as the Blue Wizards. Back at Khazad-dûm, Disa and her friends use the sonic ability to locate the path of the light through the mountain again, but fail to find it again, like basically bring it back the way they wanted to, causing another collapse, cutting it off again. The Hand of Darkness closing around Khazad-dûm that Durin speaks of is probably both Sauron and the Dwarven Rings of Power, but also probably the Balrog waking. There's a lot of bad things happening in Khazad-dûm right now. Galadriel goes to see Elrond to try and get his help again, and he basically calls her out for being played by a fiddle like Sauron, who is now playing all the elves like a fiddle. He's not wrong. He's got Celebrimbor eating out of his hand, like he'll do anything that Sauron tells him to do. And a lot of what the elves are doing now with their rings of power are basically what Sauron wants them to do, like this is all part of his master plan. Cirdan tells a couple jokes about some really notable elves from the history of Tolkien's lore. Rúmil was an elf who eventually lived in Lórien, where Galadriel rules during the Third Age. Daron was the lore master and a musician working for Thingol, and is basically one of the greatest musicians of all the elves, basically of all history. He's a big part of Beren and Lúthien's story too. Who Cirdan jokes was insufferable in a drunk, but was an amazing musician. Like he was terrible, but he could play great music. We see him playing around with Narya, the Ring of Fire, showing its effect on the surrounding sea life, explaining why it's important that they don't let the elven rings fall into Sauron's hands. Back in Rhûn, the stranger winds up finding the staff that he kept seeing in his visions at the well, and winds up using his power to create a tornado to stop the Runish soldiers from taking them, but also winds up leading to Nori and Poppy getting carried off in the tornado. Not totally clear what's going on here, like obviously they're not going to kill him off this way, so either this has something to do with what the Dark Wizard is doing, or this is some hallucination that the stranger is having, but you can let me know in the comments. How do Poppy and Nori survive this? They've gone full Wizard of Oz, like where's that tornado gonna dump them? Back at Eregion, Celebrimbor makes Ithildin from the last bits of Mithril. This is the actual writing that eventually goes around the doors to cause the doors of Durin that eventually he helps create. Then just like Gil-galad and Elrond were both saying earlier about how Sauron influences people, like once he works his way into your mind, he stays there forever. Celebrimbor can't stop thinking about Halbrand, like he keeps going back to him and eventually shows up and invites him in. Notice how he perks up when he mentions the Rings of Power, like he wants to find out what happened with the rings, did they work? Sauron basically playing Celebrimbor like a fiddle, like he's playing everyone else. There's a couple funny, ironic things that he says too. When Celebrimbor says, "You have no idea what it feels like to create something so important after so many centuries of trying." Basically, this whole endeavor, like everything that's happening now, is all part of Sauron's long-term plan. Many, many, many thousands of years, like tens of thousands of years. Also love the funny moment where he says he's going to open a bottle of wine from back in the First Age, meaning that it would be thousands of years old. Like this is a priceless bottle of wine. Also a reference back to the wine that Adar was given by Sauron, which is how he basically pulled him into his thrall. It's kind of what plays out during their conversation here, where Halbrand reveals himself as Annatar, which is just another disguise from the books. The Halbrand identity is not from the books, but Annatar is. He basically winds up putting on like a full song and dance show for Celebrimbor. Like, it's kind of meant to be a little bit funny and ironic, like it's a little over the top on purpose. But the way he reveals his Anatar form is that he plays this like he's revealing he's a messenger sent from Eru to guide Celebrimbor to help save the world, making him feel like he's been blessed by the Valar, like this is the highest of honors, that they've sent someone to help guide his hand directly. So at this point, Celebrimbor will basically do anything that Sauron tells him to do, thinking that he's doing the will of Eru. There are a couple very memeable moments here too. He calls Celebrimbor the Lord of the Rings. He said the name of the thing in the thing, but the idea here is that Sauron is meant to be the actual Lord of the Rings. When he says his name is Anatar, Lord of Gifts, the name Anatar is based on the Elvish words for Lord of Gifts. Then they end the episode with the idea that Durin the Fourth gets an invitation from Celebrimbor and he's going to create the Dwarven Rings of Power. Episode 3 was titled The Eagle and the Scepter, which is a reference to everything that's happening on Numenor. The eagle is a reference to one of the giant eagles showing up on Numenor during the episode. The eagles were actually living on Numenor for a long time. But after Pharazôn came to power and fell under Sauron's influence and they decided to try and invade the Undying Lands, all the eagles basically took off, like, we're out of here, dude. So by the time the downfall of Numenor happened, all the eagles had been long gone. The scepter is the actual physical symbol of Numenorian power that's handed down from king or to queen, whoever becomes the next leader. We actually see Miriel about to take that at the end of the episode. Then a big part of the opening scene of the episodes are showing what happened to Isildur. His horse refuses to leave because he senses that Isildur is still alive. Very smart horse that kicks the crap out of a bunch of orcs all by itself. Then tracking down Isildur in a spider's lair. Now, it's not clear if this is Shelob's lair because we're in Mordor here, and Shelob's lair is in the edges of Mordor, so this is like the right place, but the spider just didn't seem quite big enough to actually be Shelob. Then on Numenor, there's this whole long-running plot with Pharazôn basically slowly trying to usurp power from Miriel, and what's going on with all the other characters around them while that's happening. They start to lay this whole subplot with Elendil's daughter hating Miriel because she blames her for her brother's death, Isildur, even though we know that he's still alive, basically using the Palantir to turn public opinion against Miriel. Part of the idea is they want to show how Pharazôn came to power and how Numenorian culture split with the Kingsmen, the people that were loyal to Pharazôn, and the people that hated the Elves, the Valar, then the faithful, the other people like Elendil, Miriel, who were still faithful to the Valar, to the Elves. Most of that goes down by the end of this episode, but obviously a lot of stuff has to happen before the actual downfall of Numenor. Then we eventually find that Elendil's daughter stole the Palantir and is going to try and use it later at the coronation. Then we go back to Mordor to meet Damrod the Hill Troll, who's supposed to be really powerful, like he's feasted on dragons, which basically means that he's killed a lot of dragons. Then there's a bit of a funny detail in the background too. Notice there's an orc baby with an orc female. They don't really get into this too much during the movies, but Peter Jackson talked about this a little bit. The idea is that orcs procreate all the time, like orc females are kept constantly pregnant, which explains why there are always so many orcs that show up so fast all the time. Basically, they're dedicated to having as many babies as possible. Then we go back to Celebrimbor, who's talking to Durin the Fourth about the Dwarven Rings of Power, and he says the name of the show inside the show, saying that they will be Rings of Power. He said the name of the thing inside the thing. And just to show you how much Sauron has twisted Celebrimbor to his will, Celebrimbor is lying to Gil-galad to give him more time to finish the rest of the Rings of Power. Back in the Southlands, they start another subplot with Isildur running into another Southlander named Estrid who stabs him. They travel to Pelargir, the early Numenorean settlement from the Second Age, but she winds up being one of Adar's people with his brand on her back. So it's not totally clear what she's doing here or what her business with Isildur is, or if she's trying to infiltrate what's happening here. They wind up getting saved from a bunch of other brigands by Arondir, who then burns Bronwyn's body with Theo's help, R.I.P. When he tells Isildur that Numenor will eventually return to Middle-earth, that is correct, because it's like a really big part of the lore, is that they create their own kingdom in Middle-earth. Eventually it becomes Gondor and a bunch of other big places. Then he tells Theo about his origin story growing up in Beleriand, more references to Beleriand. He was born there during the First Age. When he says it lies under the wave, that's the War of Wrath causing it to sink. There have been many references to that, like we saw the flashbacks during Season 1 as well. And all these references back to Beleriand might just be them foreshadowing the downfall of Numenor, because something similar winds up happening to Numenor, but just for different reasons, like it sinks for different reasons. Theo also references his mystery father. Again, there were a lot of theories about who this would wind up being during Season 1. We'll see if they eventually reveal this at some point. Like I said, there's always the chance that Theo comes from that line of kings of the Southlands, like he is one of the kings of men. Isildur then explains Numenorean architecture to Theo, explaining aqueducts, like all the great things that they created back on Numenor. Part of the idea in the Lord of the Rings history is that most of the big structures you see later in the timeline during the Third Age in the movies in Middle-earth were built by the Numenoreans, particularly the group of Numenoreans that came from Isildur and his father Elendil. They go to rescue his horse from the other brigands that follow Adar, and it turns into a much larger battle, and it seems like Damrod the Hill Troll is the one that grabs Theo. Then we get Miriel's coronation, which goes south pretty fast. Notice that she and Elendil are both wearing white, and Pharazôn is wearing the red that he said was his favorite, representing the new direction that he wanted to take things, like make Numenor great again. Ariel walks in revealing the Palantir, which Pharazôn then takes advantage of, trying to twist the nobles against her and the rest of the way against the Elves and the Valar. Notice that Elendil also gets a real big magical shock when he touches it too. Not really clear why that happened or if he saw something when he touched the Palantir. As things deteriorate, chaos erupts. One of the great eagles shows up to bless Miriel, but Pharazôn's supporters basically twist it to make it seem like the eagle is there for him instead. The look on his face as he sees the eagle is a little bit like the end of The Boys Season 3 with Homelander not really understanding what's going on, but then suddenly things turning in his favor and him being all surprised. So basically this has been the story of how he comes to power in Numenor. Really bad things on the horizon for Numenor, so if you value your life, you will get back to Middle-earth as quickly as possible. And they basically end the episode with the creation of the Dwarven Rings of Power. Durin the Fourth convinces his father to bring more mithril and sign a bargain with Celebrimbor to supply all the mithril they need to make the rest of the Rings of Power. And a couple really important things that are happening in this moment here. Like, yes, they're creating them, that's a really cool thing. But notice that Sauron grabs the mithril before they add it, and it looks like he imbues it with some of his own power, like he casts some magic on it. Like, they really pause on this frame here, too. So, like, he really puts himself into this material as he's creating the rings. As the metals mix together and spin around, forming the eye, which looks just like the Eye of Sauron. It also did that during Season 1, too. So the idea is that after this, they'll create the rings for men, then eventually at some point he'll create the One Ring of Power. That might happen at the end of this season, or they could push that to Season 3. Just depends on how fast they want things to move through the rest of the episodes. But a big part of the idea is that they create all these different rings of power, and then Sauron tries to claim them all back from Celebrimbor. There was a bunch of stuff happen, like each of the episodes was over an hour long, so if there are any Easter eggs or references that you spotted in any of the first 3 episodes that I didn't talk about in this video, just write them below in the comments. It'll be 1 episode per week after this for the rest of the season though. There's a bunch of really big stuff coming up, so there's probably going to be a couple big trailers in the next couple weeks too, so make sure you enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss any of that stuff. I just did a big trailer video for the new Game of Thrones series, Night of the Seven Kingdoms. Click here for that, and click here for my brand new House of the Dragon Season 3 video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.